Welcome back to Live from Occupy City Hall. My name is Leslie Rolfe. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance, and today we're going to have a discussion about the murder of Mark Barmore by Rockford Police Department officers Oda Poole and Stan North. While speaking about the murder of Mark Barmore, I'm going to refer back to a pamphlet I have here, which is entitled The History of the Winnebago Boone County Integrity Task Force. It's a pamphlet that the May 30th Alliance produced and has circulated around the Rockford, Illinois, Winnebago County area. Within this pamphlet are news stories and legal documentation from different incidents of officer involved shootings that have taken place in the Winnebago County area. Date of incident, August 24th, 2009. Name of victim, Mark Barmore. Officer involved, Oda Poole, Stan North. Location of event, House of Grace Daycare and Preschool Learning Center. Injuries from event, 1 murdered. Cook County Integrity Task Force findings, justified. During the late morning on August 24, 2009, a woman called the Rockford Police Department alleging that Mark Anthony Barmore had threatened to slash her throat the previous night. According to dispatch records, the woman stated that Barmore was sleeping inside and that she would wait outside for police. Units were dispatched and arrived on scene between 10 to 15 minutes after the initial call, but did not apprehend Barmore, reporting that he fled out the back door of the residence. A few minutes later, a Rockford police dispatcher notified patrol units that a person called, quote, Skip, end quote, fitting the description of the individual for whom police were looking, was seen walking on the Jefferson Street Bridge on Rockford's west side. Dispatch notified units that, quote, Skip, end quote, had apparently, quote, pulled a knife out on a girl, end quote. Officers North and Poole were assigned to the squad wagon for Rockford's west side. The officers were dispatched to the Jefferson Street Bridge. 5 minutes after North and Poole were assigned to respond to the Jefferson Street Bridge, dispatch provided more detailed information about the person for whom they were searching, including his name, a more complete physical description, and that Barmore was wanted on a warrant and might still be armed with a knife. A few minutes after receiving the information, officers North and Poole notified dispatch that they had Barmore in sight in the, quote, Winnebago Woodlawn area. The evidence shows that officers North and Poole saw Barmore standing outside the House of Grace Church talking with a group of people. According to several of these individuals, Barmore, who came to the church occasionally, was relating trouble he was having, including an altercation with a girl where, quote, he almost had to slit her throat, end quote, resulting in the police coming after him. Church members and officials were encouraging him to stay out of trouble and become involved in a boxing group the church was soon to begin. When Barmore saw officers North and Poole and realized they were looking for him, he ran from the group and into the church, slipping in behind a church official who was entering the church. Officer Poole got out of the police vehicle and pursued Barmore, while Officer North drove the vehicle to the side of the building to prevent Barmore from fleeing through the side doors of the church. The doors to the church were locked, but Officer Poole was led into the church by a church official. 2 women in the church told Officer Poole that the man had gone downstairs and that there were children in the basement. A young man held the door open for Officer North and also told him that Barmore had gone downstairs. Officer North went downstairs with Officer Poole right behind him. According to Officer North's statement to RPD, he drew his service weapon just before entering the daycare room at the bottom of the basement stairs. Officer Poole, according to his statement, had drawn his weapon while in the hallway of the church upstairs. When officers North and Poole entered the daycare room in the basement, they immediately saw somewhere between 8 and 15, quote, about preschool age, end quote, children, in their estimation, as well as, quote, about 2 adults, end quote. At least 1 child in the daycare classroom in the basement saw Barmore enter the classroom and run past the counter through a small kitchen area into what was known as the boiler room or closet. Officer North was the first one to enter the daycare room in the basement and asked, quote, where did he go, end quote, or words to that effect. 1 or more children and possibly the daycare teacher stated that he had gone into the closet. Sheila Brown, a pastor of the House of Grace Church and proprietor of the daycare, had followed the officers into the basement. Seeing officers' guns drawn, she and the daycare teacher already in the room gathered the children into the corner of the classroom opposite the boiler room and, quote, shielded the kids with their bodies, end quote. Had entered the boiler room, Officer North focused his attention to the boiler room door, which had a small window in the center at about Officer North's eye level. Because it was dark inside the room, Officer North activated his gun-mounted flashlight. Officer Poole entered the basement during this time and was right behind Officer North as Officer North immediately began to try to open the boiler room door. Officers North and Poole stated that they attempted to push open the boiler room door, but that Barmore was pushing the door back, quote, attempting to barricade the door closed, end quote. In the words of Officer Poole, witness and officer statements reported that the officers yelled at Barmore to come out of the closet, get down, and to put his hands up. Officers North and Poole were able to open the door a few inches at first and then approximately 12 inches, all while Barmore was attempting to keep the door closed. Barmore reached out and grabbed a long white object, later determined to be a metal ballast cover, at which point officers North and Poole were able to force the door open, pushing Barmore back into the boiler room and causing him to drop the ballast cover. While the officers' statements are ambiguous on this point, it appears that the officers may actually have pursued Barmore into the boiler room. The boiler room, which was 15 feet wide by approximately 33 feet long, was not illuminated except by Officer North's gun-mounted flashlight and any light reaching it from the daycare classroom. According to officers' statements, Officer North then stepped back to, quote, extend the distance, end quote, between himself and Barmore. Officer Poole held his pistol, quote, in a close quarters combat style hold, end quote, close to his chest and remained either inside or at the doorway of the boiler room very close to Barmore. According to the officers' statements, the reason for maintaining this close proximity to Barmore was to keep Barmore from retreating back into the boiler room from where he might, quote, get away, end quote, and take hostages or otherwise cause harm. Officers Poole and North state that Officer Poole was very close to Barmore, and Barmore was able to reach out and grab Officer Poole's service weapon by the barrel. Officer North indicates that Barmore first reached for Officer Poole's service weapon with one hand, then with two. Officer Poole states that Barmore immediately, quote, lunged for his weapon with both hands, end quote. In either event, both officers report that very quickly, both Officer Poole and Barmore had both hands on Officer Poole's gun. Barmore with both hands on the barrel of the gun, and Officer Poole with one hand on the gun grip and one hand over Barmore's hand. Officer Poole and Barmore struggled over the gun while, quote, within inches, end quote, of each other and with the gun at chest level. Officer Poole reported that he believed that Barmore was struggling to disarm him and that if Barmore were to succeed, Barmore might use the weapon against one of the officers. Officer Poole reported that when he was able to push the barrel of the weapon towards Barmore, he pulled the trigger and saw the bullet strike Barmore in the neck. Officer Poole reported that after being shot, Barmore moved back and then forward again, maintaining his hold on the gun. Officer Poole and Barmore continued to struggle, falling against the sink with their backs to Officer North. Officer Poole reported that he heard Officer North discharge his weapon, at which point he was able to pull his gun away from Barmore. Officer Poole reported he then saw Barmore fall, quote, against the sink and then fall to the floor, landing on his back, end quote. Officer Poole reported that Officer North then broadcast over the police radio a call for officer assistance and medical attention for Barmore. At this point, according to Officer Poole, he yelled to the daycare teachers to take the children from the room.